Then last fall, I transitioned into becoming a leader for this department that I've been a part of these 6 years. So that's also very nice because the group of people is awesome. And in addition to this HPC system, I mean, we are deploying autonomous robots which are doing inspections on facilities. We are building systems for storing and interrogating really big data. And we are also into digital twin solutions. So that's really nice. And if you want to know more about Equinor, there is a stand in the stand area. So go and talk to them. They have things to say. All right. So why complexity? Well, I myself has always kind of had an interest in complexity and what that is about. And actually, a few years back, I gave this presentation on emerging complexity, where one of the things I figured out while preparing for that talk was that people have done, there are TED Talks and scientific papers and whatnot about what amoebas and oats can do together. And like scientists are super excited. The reason being because they can take these mazes, create these mazes, put like single cell organisms, so no like central brain, no nothing, put them in the maze and spread out oats, and they do complicated things, or they do problem solving. So they could do like shortest path from like one oat to the other one. They even had one experiment where they spread oats out on this large table, and then the amoeba formed this robust network that were connecting these food sources. And what they have done actually were to place them similarly to what the railway stations in Tokyo looked like. And the amoeba that you got afterwards was remarkably similar to the railway network in Tokyo itself. And like they were amazed. But my argument is that if there are anyone in the world that both are primed for understanding complexity and also needs to understand complexity, it is the people in the software business. Because on a daily basis, we participate in this process of taking these like bits that we are flipping, like almost the most basic operation you can imagine. And then we go all the way from flipping these bits into producing these like digital systems that we have around us. And that is quite a span. So if someone is to understand that simple things can give amazing results, it better be us. And the reason I care about this also, and why I think software developers have to kind of deal with complexity, is that what we are really doing now, I mean, one thing is that we have data, which is documenting what we are observing, but the knowledge of our peers and of our colleagues is what we are persisting in software. So we are kind of the librarians of the digital library of knowledge. And we are writing the books of this library that are documenting what we know as society. And in addition to that, we actually make that knowledge executable, which is super awesome. So the world around us is just changing faster and faster, and the problems that we have to deal with and the challenges that we have to deal with are getting more and more complex, and the rules of the game that we are playing is not always clear. It is changing along the way. And that leads to us having to take a different approach to the world than what we perhaps had to do in the past. So my claim is that dealing with complexity can be super, super simple, but at the same time, super difficult. Because as many things in life, if you do somewhat the right thing every day, over and over and over again, you get great things out of it. But that is difficult by itself, because you have to do it day by day. So my claim is that if you are able to get a description of the current state of what you're dealing with, actual insight into what you're dealing with, and you're able to establish a direction of where you would like to go, and take a single step from where you are today to where you would like to be, then you're good to go. Because then you just rinse and repeat. You take that single step today, and then you take a new step tomorrow. And as I said, this is simple, but also difficult. And just imagine, to illustrate why we need all three of them, let's just, for a moment, imagine that we are on a boat on the sea of complexity. And imagine that we don't know our current state, but we know where we would like to go, and we are able to move. We are able to take a step forward. That basically implies that we are lost. We don't know where we are. We know where we would like to go. We are able to move around. It doesn't really help. And similarly, if we know where we are, but we don't know where we would like to go, and we are able to move, then we just wander around. Don't know what we're doing, but we can at least move around. The third situation being, we know where we are, we know where we'd like to go, but we are unable to move. That's a pretty frustrating situation. But it still happens. So, what can possibly go wrong, right? Well, I think this is the most common mistake. It is so easy to fool yourself and others on what is your current state. Doesn't matter if it is your software system, how your team is operating, how you are interacting with a customer, what the customer actually wants, how your organization is operating, or something else, like whether your house needs painting. It is so easy and convenient to fool yourself into believing that the current state is something else than what it actually is. And at times it can be so challenging to get people into the same room and agree upon, yes, this is how things currently are. Because sometimes that's painful. Because if you're having this discussion, there is a possibility that your current state isn't exactly what you would like it to be. But that is the case for all of us. So you kind of just have to embrace that and then own that and try to move forward. So, in the book called From Good to Great, there is this paradox being introduced called the Stockdale paradox. And I think about this every time I end up in a situation like this, because I think it's awesome. So, it says the following: you must maintain unwavering faith. You can and will prevail in the end. So you need to cling to that direction, regardless of the difficulties, and at the same time, have the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. So, brutal reality, folks. Brutal honesty about the current state, instead of fooling yourself into a convenient perspective and comforting perspective on the world. Second one is cargo culting. Happens all the time. You get someone saying, this is really difficult. We need to see what everyone else is doing. My first claim is that if you believe that you need an external perspective, take a vacation. And I mean, summer is approaching soon, so who knows? Maybe you'll actually do so. Because I mean, taking a step aside from what you're currently doing and coming back with a fresh perspective, that always helps me at least. And while I was making this this presentation the first time, I was at this. I was also watching this show called Sandman on Netflix. Highly recommended. And without giving away the content, there was this one like quote in the series that struck me because I was making this slide at the same time, and it said something like, "I don't travel to visit new places, nor to get home, but to be able to enter home as if it was a new place." Which I think is really nice. And this is what vacation can do for you. So take a vacation, or take your weekend off, or whatever, come back with a fresh perspective. But, all right, so enough pitching about vacation. You all know how this works. I mean, May is more days off than at work almost. So, all right. So the term cargo culting stems from something that one observed during the Second World War. So the US Army were establishing bases on islands in the Pacific, and they built airports. They had planes coming in with cargo and goods that they needed. And then you had locals at these islands observing that they made this strip. And then they had like these planes coming in and offloading goods and food and clothes and whatnot. It's amazing, right? It just comes from the sky and it delivers good things. So then the war was over, the army left, and then you could come back years later and observe the locals still trying to operate the airport. They even built small things that looked like planes out of wood and tried to operate them in the hope that there would come goods from the sky. They were doing everything right, but at the same time, everything wrong. So don't cargo cult. Don't just mimic what someone else is doing without understanding why they are doing it. Don't borrow people's conclusions when you look externally. Borrow their argument. Based on what is their current situation, they have figured out that they want to go in this direction and they need to do these and these steps. Break it down to that so that you don't end up taking a step which does not at all make sense in your current situation, because it happens all the time. I mean, people also external to your situation are really smart. They have applied their brains. So don't pick their cargo, pick their brain. All right. Another thing is this temptation of taking big steps. It is so easy to argue to yourself and others, we need to do this big thing because we are far away from where we would like to be. We need to do it fast. It isn't possible to decompose. We can't get anything better tomorrow or next week than what we have currently. We need to invest a lot of time. And that might be true. You might need to invest a lot of time. You might need to really put effort into this. But don't fool yourself into believing that you can't take small steps. I mean, we've all done this, right? I mean, you're sitting there developing some software, and then someone raises their hand and says, "We need a feature branch." And then sometimes there are good arguments for that, but what also often happens is that that feature branch starts off, development is going on, the feature is being produced. At the same time, your main branch is just developing in a completely different direction, right? Because these people aren't the only people on this project. And the gap between this feature branch and what is going on in reality, which is your main branch, is just diverging. Yeah, exactly. But people have done this, and they still do it. Yeah, exactly. Everywhere. No. It's perfectly fine. I don't mind. So avoid this, right? We've all been there. We've done it here, and we've done it other places as well. We need to completely change how we are developing software. We need to completely change something. Well, start with a single step. Because if not, you end up in this situation that whatever you are trying to do over here, you will not be able to actually get it into reality. And you also end up in this sunken cost fallacy, right? Because you've spent so much time on this thing that you can't really abandon it. Or that's at least the feeling that you're getting, right? You're never getting that investment back. But you're still kind of trying to push it even further. It's so easy and alluring to hope for a big win instead of embracing hard work. But that's what you need to do. And then, since the rules are changing, situations that you hadn't foreseen is coming up, you need to have capacity to deal with that. Both things that you didn't foresee, things that you need to learn, things that need to be done. You need the ability to react and be proactive. So back in the days, I was doing some sports. And we were often discussing this thing that we called a stress funnel. So that was kind of an image of how much load you could take in total. So I mean, life in general is kind of pouring some stress into this. I mean, maybe you're studying, maybe you're doing exams, maybe something is going on in your family, who knows. Then you're pouring maybe a side job or your actual job. Maybe you're pouring, and then you're pouring training into this thing as well. And all of this accumulates. And if the total becomes too much, then you're sitting in your own stress funnel, drowning in stress, and it's just pouring out of the sides. So you need to have sustainable pace, and you need to have the flexibility and slack to be able to deal with what is coming your way. And my claim is that today, in the landscape that we are operating, that is not possible as an individual. You have to be a team, you have to collaborate, you have to do it together. Because that is the way to get the robustness and responsiveness that you need, which is far beyond what any individual can offer. I mean, when Newton himself was humble enough to say that if he had seen further than others, it was because he was standing on the shoulders of giants. Then we better at least try to be a bit humble as well. Another thing that I'd like to convey is feedback loops and the importance of feedback loops. I mean, even the PDCA loop, which is the plan, do, check, act loop, which is promoted among others within Lean, hints towards that you should start with a plan, because the P is for the plan. But the truth is that you can just shuffle it around in whatever order you want to. You don't need to start with a plan. If you're able to respond on feedback and get that going fast enough, it doesn't really matter. Start with being able to do something, or start with the ability to check whether what is currently there is actually up and running, and then just go with that. And in particular, I think it's easy. It's maybe the easiest step to come up with a plan. And then the rest is the difficult part. Which is why I think you should challenge the people with a plan. But you should listen really carefully to the people that have to live the consequences of that plan. That might be your users, might be your developers that are developing the software, it might be others. But listen to the people that are living the consequences of the decisions being made. And that includes yourself in different manners. If you already are the people, or one of the people observing the consequences of what is going on, you better listen to yourself. But this also implies that if you would like to realize what's going on, put yourself in a position so that you actually live the consequences. Become among the people that live the consequences of the decisions being made. There is literature that states that the difference between a true expert and an expert is whether you are able to see over time, are you able to see the consequences of the things that you are an expert about, the advice that you give, or the things that you do. And it's so easy to be an expert if nobody can actually see the consequence of what you're seeing. And it's so easy to fool yourself into believing that you're an expert if you don't see the consequences of what you're advising on. If you want to be really good, then put yourself where the consequences are. All right. I have a thing for innovation. And I don't know if it's positive or negative. It's a bit of both. I have a, yeah. Because I think too often when we discuss innovation, we focus on the creativity or surprising part of this thing. Someone did something novel. But the truth is that if it doesn't provide value, then it isn't innovative. Then it's only creative. It doesn't really matter how high your spaghetti tower is. If it doesn't produce value, which it most likely doesn't, nobody actually cares that you built a spaghetti tower, then it isn't innovative. It might be creative, as no other spaghetti tower ever is, but it isn't innovative. And if you look at historic innovations, they are often perceived as innovative, either because they were fostered somewhere in some kind of group that is able to move faster than their peers, which means that it just appears that something came out of nothing. Or it came from a combination of different domains that the rest of the society didn't expect to be combined. And I've talked to people that have done like truly nice things that people would claim this is it. Innovative. But the thing is that when you talk to them, they say, well, I had the possibility to do this. We had been learning this thing for a long time, so we actually knew what was going on. We realized that if you combine this thing with this thing over here, it actually works. And then we realized that you need to do this thing in addition. When people are saying things like that, you better listen. While when people are dancing and celebrating that this is innovative, I would say that maybe you should listen to the other guy instead. And to come back to this with categorization, because this is something we do all the time. We as human beings are categorizing knowledge. When you learn something new, you connect it to things that you have already learned. And the same with the organization that you are residing within as well. It is categorizing knowledge in some way, both through how people are communicating, but also in how it is actually formally organizing itself. And if you have categorized the things that you know so that the distance from these two things that needs to be combined for this thing to appear, if that distance is big, then you will perceive something as innovative because it is combining things that you didn't expect. And I think the same holds for your organization as well. If something is a combination of two things that your organization didn't really cluster close together, it will be perceived as more innovative. And I think what we often end up doing is that when we as community and we as a society are celebrating these kind of buzzword things, we kind of end up celebrating that gap between your pace and the pace of the people that were able to build this thing, or that gap between the two different domains that needed to be combined to make this thing. So then you're celebrating a perspective on knowledge that didn't cut it, which is absurd when you think about it in that way. It's like there is this black box with something innovative, and then you have the choice between like dancing around it in circles and celebrating that it is a black box, or opening it up and figuring out what is actually inside. And then a lot of people kind of just choose to dance around it and celebrate the black box. Don't do that. Open the box and figure out what's inside. I mean, I know that you're good at this, but demystify things and require people around you as well to demystify things. Because, I mean, we are the people that have seen bits being flipped go into amazing things. So we know that this is possible. And then we need to tell the rest of the people also that this is how it works. All right. A different thing is that when you're working with a complex situation, it isn't a deterministic process. You can't control the output. You can't promise someone, I will get this kind of result in the end. So you have to accept that. You have to accept that there is a stochastic process, a process that you can't control, because if not, then you have already lost. This implies, among others, that instead of setting targets, which is something that we are easily push a bit back on, right? You need to set directions. You need to say, this is the direction that we would like to go. Because you can't really control what it pans out to exactly in the end. And whenever you try to pin down uncertainty, then you just completely lose control. So instead of doing that, and also instead of just saying, well, I can't control these things, so I can't do anything, try to look at it as the outcome of this thing is a probability distribution. I might come with this kind of result, or I might come with that kind of result. And that probability distribution, this thing I can control. I can actually skew this distribution and push it in the direction that I would like to see it. I can't guarantee that I will not come up with an unlikely outcome of it, but I can skew the distribution in the direction that I would like it to go in. I can put myself and my team and my organization in a best possible position to deal with this complex situation. And something that resembled a lot with me, at least, was right before Jakob Ingebrigtsen attended his first Olympics, or not, maybe not first, but in 2021 at least, a few days before. They had this discussion, and then they said, like, the feat is not to win an Olympic gold medal, which he did a few days later, but to be in the position where one can win a gold medal. Right? They can't guarantee that they will win, but they can push their distribution in the direction that increases the probability of getting that medal. You control the things that you control, and then you try to make the best out of that situation. All right. I mean, back in the days, the world had a huge set of complicated problems. And complicated problems imply that you can often divide them into pieces and deal with them individually. While complexity, you get the symbiosis between the different things are creating behavior that you didn't expect. Which means that at some point, divide and conquer was a valid method to actually solve problems. But that is not the case anymore. And to really understand what you are dealing with, you have no other choice but to push for inclusion, which means that you need to lift the opinions that you have available, the perspectives that you already have available. And then you need diversity. You need diversity in the opinions you have available. But if you have a diverse pool of perspectives and opinions, and you're not able to actually utilize them, then there is no point. So inclusion first, diversity second. And don't just apply that on where you would like to go, but apply it on all of these different steps. So use the different perspectives you have on your current state, understanding where you are today. Use the different opinions and perspectives to figuring out what is the next step that we are going to do. What is the thing that we can do today to improve our situation? And use it to form the direction that you would like to head in. So, what does it take to navigate complexity? Well, description of the current state, brutal honesty, sitting down, discussing, being okay with things as they are, establishing a direction of where you would like this thing to go, and then the ability to take small steps. And this is not the only way to do this. I'm not selling a recipe here. I'm just selling one approach. But the truth is that if you are to walk every path to Rome, you will get nowhere. So you need to choose something and then stick with it. So, my claim is that if you stay true to these principles, you'll be riding the wave of complexity in no time. All right. Thank you. Any comments or questions? Shoot.
I should first of all compliment on the visuals. Something tells me you've done it yourself.
No, I've generated them, unfortunately. Yeah.
For the second one, you are working in a monstrous organization.
Yes.
And there are stuff called legacy code.
I've heard about it, yes.
Which is the worst nightmare for all the programmers, especially who join this fresh and good ideas and so on. How would you navigate the transition from some legacy? How would you push for the changes towards new approaches? For example, from XML to API.
Aye, what a good question. Well, I mean, so I've actually spent 5 years in a project like this. And I mean, I think the first thing you kind of have to agree or like figure out is that, I mean, I come from also mathematics background, so that's kind of a bit of my perspective on the world, so I apologize for that. But I kind of quickly realized that I can't kind of use the objective function, like the objective, like absolute measure of the state of our system as what we look at. I need to kind of look at the gradient, like the quality of our improvement, the quality of how we are moving as the thing that we are focusing on. Which means that then you can be like, you can start out with the worst code ever, which we didn't, by the way, but you can start out with something which is really not like what you would like it to be, and then you can still be like super awesome and still improving on your way of dealing with that.
So you mean assess and then trying to get people over by the outcomes of your assessment?
Yeah. Yes. And then I also have to say that, I mean, yes, legacy code is something that one has to deal with, but I mean, the alternative is that the software wasn't relevant anymore and it was phased out, right? I mean, the software that you are writing today, even if it was started last week, fresh out of the box, best case scenario is that it is legacy code at some point. I mean, we have twisted this word a bit because either it is valuable, it remains valuable over time, people around the product is actually able to kind of turn it into something that remains useful over time, and the problem it's solving is actually relevant over time, or the software just dies. So I mean,
It's not a problem anymore.
then it's not then nobody has to deal with it, so that's fine. Yes, but I think we shouldn't fool ourselves into believing that this point about having legacy code or some gap between what the system looks like today and what it should have looked like if we could like knips our fingers and turn it into something else. That is not a one-time off problem that someone created in the past and you have to deal with today. That's a problem that is constantly going on in our business and will not go away. That is a part of our business and how we are operating.
And what is your vaccine on it?
Accept it and leverage it. I mean, for me at least, technical debt. I mean, technical debt is like going in the bank and asking for money, which is debt, right? So I mean, you are borrowing something today to get a pace in your project that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise, and then you return that. You have to return that because if not, then you go bankrupt in the future. And if you're never willing to do that, then you will just be slow all the time. But being able to take some debt today, but actually paying it down tomorrow when needed and when it actually gives you value, I think that's the way to go about it.
So you mean the balance?
Yes, like everything else. I mean, it's a bit of the boring answer, right? Like it depends and you need to balance it and all of that stuff. But yes, basically. Yeah, no problem.
I liked how you spoke about putting yourself in the path of the decisions and the problems. Could you speak a little bit more on that? I basically want to take some notes on that.
Yeah? Yeah.
Yeah, like putting yourself in the path of the consequences makes it matter to you. I think that's a really powerful way to put it. I just wanted to commend and maybe you could speak a little bit more on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it also comes down to trust, right? Because I mean, if you see someone making a decision and then you know that they will be gone the second they have made a decision, you don't really trust it, right?
No.
Well, if someone is saying, this is what we're going to do, and I'm going to be here with you when this actually unfolds, because they are never like, I mean, then you trust them, right? Because people talk about good decisions. I mean, you see this in the news, in politics, in whatnot. I mean, people are talking about good decisions as if those are the decisions with only upsides. But those are not good decisions. Those are easy decisions. The good decisions are the decisions that we make where you balance the pros and the cons. Because that's how most decisions are. Most things that you have to decide upon have some pros and some cons, and then you have to deal with that. And if you have the people that, if you're not willing to live with the cons of the decision that you are making, then people will not adhere to the decision that has been made, so they will stray away from it over time, or it will just put you in a situation where you didn't deal with the downsides, and then you're just far worse off than what you could have been if you had accepted that that was part of the game. Yeah.
Can I just elaborate on that?
Yes, sure.
Because when you said put yourself into the person who would live with the consequences of that decision being made.
Yep.
Let's make a scenario when I'm as an engineer or developer done something that the engineers on the platform would use.
Yeah.
How exactly would I do it? Because I don't know their reality. I know the specs, and I've seen subject matter expert here and there on some meetings. How could I put myself in the stand of being an engineer on the platform using my software?
I mean, this is not always easy, right? I mean, yes, it can be an engineer which is done on a platform which is far away, or it could be you delivering some internet service for which you don't really have a direct connection to the people using it, right? I mean, this happens all the time in our business. So, I mean, first being able to like emphasize with people and kind of have empathy in the position that you're putting them in, and just trying to mentally model what will this be like is like one step, of course. But I think at the end of the day, you just need to find someone that is using the thing that you're using. Either by going there or by just taking a vacation and then come back and then use your product as the first thing you do after getting back from vacation. Or, I don't know, get a friend to try to use it, or have someone new in your team. That is also brilliant, right? I mean, if you have new people entering your team, before they look at the code at all or what you are doing, have them use your product. Explain to them, this is the thing that we're making, try to use this thing and give us some honest feedback. And then, of course, you have to be reassuring that this is okay and this is what we actually want you to do. And then, if you're lucky, you might actually get honest feedback, right? Yeah. And then, yeah, I recently actually bought this book, which is called something like Receiving Feedback as if it is a gift or something. I don't remember the exact title. I haven't started reading it yet. But I think this is a bit what it is, right? I mean, getting like honest feedback, that is a gift. And then you kind of need to treat it as such, instead of like yelling at people because they gave you exactly what you asked for and it was uncomfortable. Because, well, that's life. Yeah, no problem. Oh, yeah.
How do you not get stuck in the process? You discussed a lot of two versions. When do you start deciding that, okay, we need to take the step forward, right? What would you say the time distinction between different things you described now?
When you do it, or how much time, like over time you...
How much time do you allow yourself to assess the situation? What time do you assess the direction before you need to take a step forward? Right? I think sometimes us developers get stuck in discussion. We can discuss things endlessly.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there are many... I think you should try to do something as fast as you can. Because that is actually also giving you input. Whenever you are interacting with something, you are actively making this system not static anymore, which implies that you are learning more than what you would have done by just observing. So, as soon as possible, do your first step and make it as small as you can, because then it's safer to do so, right? Because yes, I agree, it's super easy to kind of spend so much time on what is currently going on or where you would like to go that you never do anything, and that's unfortunate, to say the least. And yeah, so just, I mean, do it as fast as you can. And I would also kind of expect that maybe you need to spend some time. I mean, if everyone is entirely new, like this is a situation you didn't know at all up front, then you probably need to spend some time understanding what this is. But starting to make small steps is also a way to learn how this system works. But I would then worry mostly about the current state and the ability to move, and then kind of establishing the direction a bit on the side as part of this. Because I mean, if you know what you're operating and you're able to actually change it, if you then figure out what the direction is, then you can just move along. And then over time, I mean, I would kind of expect you to not forget what you learned yesterday when you come back to work the day after, which implies that I would kind of expect over time the effort you need both on figuring out what is the current state and also what is your direction will kind of decline over time, and then you can actually spend most of your time on actually making steps forward, small steps. And then of course that would fluctuate and all of this, but yeah, that is kind of the trend that I would expect at least. Yeah. Don't be afraid to take small steps. That's the point of small steps.
An example of a small step.
An example of a small step. I mean, that can be anything, right? I mean, if you like this legacy system that we discussed earlier, I mean, are you able to do like any change at all to the system? It doesn't really matter, right? Like change the spelling of a word or whatnot and get that into production and see that you can actually do that. I mean, if you can do that, then that is a first very tiny step. Or if you're a new developer to a project, are you able to commit at all? Can you like build these things and get things up and running the tests and get even code into the code base at all? Or if you want to, if you are ending up in a software team where you don't really think that they know what they're doing at all, which I hope you don't, then of course you can, try introducing something that you believe makes sense, right? I mean, maybe we should every now and then evaluate what we are actually doing. There is a thing online called a retrospective. Let's start with that, right? I mean, instead of like, let's do everything and this is my perfect recipe of how it should be, because the process is part of the learning. So like, take this small step, introduce one thing, get buy-in for that, start doing it. If you are to start exercise, start with a small walk. Yeah, just do something and do something small. Because if kind of the investment that you have to make to take this single step is acceptable for you to lose, then people will very rarely complain about it. Nobody will say like, you went for this 20-minute walk, you were trying to get in better shape and it was a complete waste of time. And then it's like, okay, but it was 20 minutes, I can deal with that. Or if your team decides like, yeah, we need to kind of figure out what we are doing here, we're going to introduce this thing called retrospective, we will do it for 3 months, one time each month, and then we will figure out whether we are going to continue doing it or not, right? I mean, just something. Okay, that's like 6 hours or 8 hours in total or whatnot. Okay, that's an investment we are willing to make. And if it doesn't pan out, then nobody is going to shoot us for losing those 8 hours and in addition learning something along the way, right? So I mean, if you manage to make this step so small that you can kind of do it and accept that it is a failure without being in this massive sunken cost situation, then I think you are in a so much better position. Because if you've kind of grinded this in your basement for 2 years and then you come up and then people say this is a complete disaster, then they will also ask you what have you been doing the last 2 years, right? So then maybe you will spend 6 more months in the basement because you realize that this might happen, and then yeah. Yes. So do something small. All right, I guess that's it. Thank you for attending.